The wind rolled in low from the west, dragging dust across the dying light of the plains. Evening came in colors of rust and ash, brushing the sky above Black Hollow, with long strokes of gold and bruised lavender. Thomas E. Boone stood beneath the shadow of his barn, pitchfork in hand, the scent of horses and dried hay clinging to the warm air. He was a man made of leather and quiet, with silver in his beard and lines deep enough to hide memories he no longer spoke of. He'd just finished tending the feed when the sound reached him, soft, broken, like a whisper through tall grass. He stilled. The horses shifted uneasily, ears flicking. He tilted his head, listening. Another rustle came, not the wind this time. Closer. Something, or someone behind the barn. He moved slow, careful not to let his boots crunch too loudly on the packed earth. Around the corner, just beyond a pile of old lumber, he saw her. A girl, no older than 20, curled against the wall like a dying animal. Dirt streaked her face. Her dress, torn at the hem and shoulder, clung to her like a faded ghost. Blood, dry and dark, had crusted at her temple. She looked up as he approached, eyes wide, wild, the whites flashing like a startled deer. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Thomas didn't speak. He crouched slowly, setting his pitchfork aside, showing her his hands, empty, unthreatening. Her breath came shallow and quick. She flinched as he reached toward her, but when he only brushed away the hair from her eyes, her shaking stilled, just barely. "You'll catch your death out here," he muttered, voice low and gruff, worn from years of silence more than use. Still, she said nothing. She tried to rise, but her legs gave out beneath her. Thomas caught her before she hit the dirt, light as a bird, bones wrapped in cloth and exhaustion. He didn't ask who she was, or what had done this to her. He'd seen that look before, long ago in southern Tennessee, when the fields burned and boys screamed under gunfire. He carried her inside the cabin. The door creaked as it always had, swinging open to the single room and stone hearth. The place smelled of wood smoke and old tobacco. He laid her gently on the cot near the fire and went to fetch water. She drank with trembling hands. When he brought her bread and a bit of leftover stew, she didn't touch the spoon, only stared at it like she'd forgotten how to eat. Eventually, her hunger won, and she dipped the spoon in with cautious hands. She still didn't speak. Thomas sat across from her, in his chair by the fire, arms resting on his knees. He didn't watch her directly, letting her settle in the warmth, without pressure. Outside, the wind picked up. He reached over to add a log to the flames. Hours passed. She dozed, woke, stared into the fire like it held answers. A dozen times her eyes darted toward the door, like she expected someone to burst through it. He recognized fear like that. It didn't come from hunger or cold. It came from being hunted. He poured her another tin of water. Her hands were steadier this time. When she took it, their fingers touched, and he felt how cold she still was beneath the blanket. "You got a name?" he asked, not expecting an answer. She blinked, lips barely parting, then gave the faintest shake of her head. Or maybe it was a no. Or maybe she didn't remember. He nodded once, slowly. "Well, you'll have one when you're ready." Outside, the coyotes cried somewhere beyond the hills. The horses shifted again in their stalls, hooves clicking on wood. Thomas reached for the old Winchester that leaned against the wall and set it beside his chair. The girl's eyes followed the motion, but she didn't flinch. "You're safe here," he said. Still no words. He didn't push. When the fire began to die, he stood. She tensed again, body coiled, not trusting even the space around her. "I'll be just over here," he told her, pointing to the small bedroll near the door. "If you need something, knock once." As he turned to lie down, she stirred. Her voice was a whisper, hoarse and thin. "Why?" He looked back at her, pausing. She met his eyes for the first time, not with fear, but something else. Wonder. Confusion. He sat back down near the fire, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Then, after a long silence, he answered. "I hear you," he said, voice low, "even if you can't speak. And sometimes that's enough." Her eyes filled. She blinked fast and turned her face toward the wall. Thomas sat there for a while longer, the fire popping softly. He didn't speak again. Neither did she. But she didn't look at the door anymore. She didn't need to. The morning sun broke slow and reluctant, slipping through the slats of the old barn, like fingers searching for something lost. Dust floated in its glow, golden and silent. Chickens picked and scratched near the troughs, their soft clucks a faint heartbeat against the emptiness of the land. Thomas Boone stood outside the cabin with a tin cup in hand, steam rising from the black coffee as he watched the world turn from shadow to light. Behind him, the girl stirred. She'd slept through the night, her breathing uneven but steady. Now, as dawn touched the cabin walls, she sat up slowly, like every bone in her body remembered a different wound. Her eyes scanned the small room, the walls, the rifle leaning by the door. Her fingers gripped the wool blanket still tucked around her. Thomas glanced back through the open door and nodded once. No words, just the calm presence of a man who didn't expect thanks. A few minutes later, she stepped outside. The cold morning air made her shiver, but she stood anyway, barefoot, silent, face drawn but less pale than the night before. She looked out at the ranch, the long stretch of earth, the edge of canyon cliffs in the far distance. Somewhere, hawks circled high in the warming sky. Thomas handed her a piece of bread and a boiled egg. She took them with hands that barely trembled. "What's your name?" he asked again, quiet. A long pause. She swallowed, then whispered, "Clara." He nodded. "Clara," he repeated like it was something he'd known all along. They stood in silence as the sun climbed higher. The breeze shifted, warm now, brushing over the dry grass and stirring something deeper than air, something unsettled. Clara's eyes never stopped moving. She looked over her shoulder too often. She winced at every distant sound. Her fingers gripped her arms as if trying to hold herself in one piece. Thomas didn't press. He fed the horses, mended a bit of fencing. Let her be. By midday, she finally spoke again. Her voice cracked like it hadn't been used in years. "They're coming," she said, barely above her breath. I ran. Thomas didn't look up from where he sat sharpening a long, rust-patched knife. "Who's coming?" She hesitated, eyes darting to the horizon. "The Keller brothers," she whispered. "5 of them. Or 6. I don't know anymore. They came to our town, Redwater. We weren't nothing to them. They rode in, shot my uncle in the middle of Sunday breakfast, just because he said they should leave the children alone." Her voice shook. "They burned the houses, took what they wanted. I saw them drag a girl into the stable. I heard her scream. I think she was 12. Thomas's sharpening slowed. "I grabbed my brother," Clara said. "We ran through the cotton fields, past the broken well. They chased us." Her lips trembled now. He made them follow him, took the horse and rode the other way. I hid. I hid until it got dark. I walked for 2 days. I didn't eat. I drank from muddy creeks. I thought I was going to die. I hoped I would. Until I saw your barn." Thomas stood, wiped the knife on his sleeve. His face didn't change, but his eyes turned distant, like he was listening to something she couldn't hear. "I ain't seen him since," she whispered. "My brother. He's only 15. And I left him." "You didn't leave him," Thomas said. "He gave you a chance." He moved to the side of the cabin, reached up and pulled a rope ladder from the rafters. Above, the attic door groaned open. "I've seen this kind of fire before," he said. "The kind that don't stop till it's ash." Clara followed him as far as the ladder, watching as he climbed with steady limbs. When he came back down, he carried a long object wrapped in canvas. He laid it across the table, unwrapping it like a holy relic. A rifle, weathered but clean, the wood oiled, the metal still shining beneath the dust of years. "You were a soldier," Clara said. Thomas didn't answer. That night, the fire burned low in the hearth. Clara sat on the cot, wrapped in a blanket that still smelled faintly of pine and smoke. Thomas sat across the room, back to the wall, eyes half closed. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the barn doors and making the shingles creak. In the shadows of the cabin, Clara's eyes blinked slower, her shoulders finally sagging in exhaustion. Sleep came, but it wasn't peaceful. The flames roared behind her eyelids. The village again. Redwater burning. Screams rising higher than the church bell. Smoke choking the sky. She ran through it all, barefoot, bleeding. Behind her, the silver-spurred boots of Cade Keller crashed through the ash. He was laughing. She turned. There was her brother, on horseback, waving her away, shouting something she couldn't hear. And then he was gone. She jolted awake, gasping. Sweat soaked her brow, though the fire had long gone cold. Thomas didn't move, just looked at her from where he sat, waiting. She swallowed, heart still pounding. "I saw him again," she said. Thomas nodded once. "He's still with you?" Clara shook her head. "Not for long. They'll come here." His eyes narrowed slightly. "Let them." She studied him now, not as the quiet farmer who'd carried her to warmth, but as something else. There was a weight in the way he spoke, the same weight she'd seen in the eyes of men who'd already made peace with dying. "You're not just a rancher," she said softly. "No," he replied, voice barely above the wind outside. "I'm what's left after everything else burned away." The fire cracked in the silence. Somewhere in the dark, an owl called. Clara lay back down. The cot felt warmer than it had before. She closed her eyes. But this time, when sleep came, she dreamed not only of fire, but of hands pulling her from it, of a voice in the dark, steady and low. "I hear you," it said. "I hear you still." The wind had turned mean by the third day. It howled across the plains like something hunted, throwing dirt into the air in long, twisting funnels. Storm clouds gathered low and slow, heavy with a promise no one wanted. The Boone ranch sat quiet beneath it all. Too quiet. Not even the chickens scratched the yard. The horses shifted in their stalls, uneasy, their breath coming fast, like they sensed what the sky refused to say. Clara stood near the barn door, arms crossed tight over her chest, the hem of her borrowed dress snapping in the wind. Her eyes scanned the horizon, over and over, as if sheer will might hold back what she feared. Then she saw them. 5 riders on the ridge, their silhouettes etched against the bruised clouds. They didn't move fast, no need to. The slow, deliberate pace of men who knew fear trailed behind them like dust. At their head rode a tall figure, wide-shouldered and cruelly still, a scar running down one cheek like lightning split skin. Silver spurs glinted as his boots rested in the stirrups. Clara went cold. Her breath caught sharp at her throat. Her knees threatened to fold beneath her. "It's them," she whispered. "Keller." Thomas stepped out from the shed, wiping his hands on a rag. He looked where she pointed, squinted once, and gave the faintest nod. No surprise in his eyes, just confirmation. "Come on," he said, voice even. She followed without question. He led her into the barn, past stacked hay and rusting tools, to the back wall. He reached beneath a tarp, pulling it aside to reveal a panel of loose boards. Behind it, a narrow stair led down into the cool dark. The smell of old earth rose up from below. "Cellar's dry," he said. "Quiet, too." Clara turned to him, panic warring with disbelief. "You're staying up here?" "They're not here for me," he replied. "Not yet, anyhow." "But, get in, Clara." Something in his voice settled the storm in her chest better than the cellar ever could. She obeyed. He closed the boards behind her without a sound. The darkness wrapped around her like wet cloth, but she kept her breath shallow, her body still. Above, the horses came first, snorting, stamping, the clink of bridles and the slow creak of leather saddles. Then came the voices. Thomas stepped out onto the porch, wiping his hands again like he'd just finished mending a gate. Calm as sunrise. Cade Keller rode up first, the silver spurs catching what little light the clouds allowed. He didn't dismount. None of them did. They sat their horses like kings staring down a peasant too stupid to know he was surrounded. "Morning," Thomas said, real slow. Cade's eyes scanned the property, barn, fences, cabin. His lip curled like he smelled something rotten. "Got a girl came through here?" he asked. "Red skirt. Dirty. Might have been limping." Thomas scratched his beard. "Only red out here's the dirt, mister." Laughter from one of the riders behind Cade, a short man with a scar splitting his lip clean in two. Cade didn't laugh. "You sure about that?" Thomas looked down the line of men. 5 of them, all armed. One had a rifle pointed casually toward the house. Another chewed on a matchstick like he didn't have a care in the world. I tend to be, Thomas said. Cade leaned forward in the saddle, the silver spurs shifting with a soft jingle. You know what happens to people who lie to us. Thomas's face didn't change. I expect they find out real quick who they were lying to. A long silence followed, thick as tar. Wind pushed dust across the porch, stinging eyes and biting skin. The storm clouds above growled but held back their fury. Cade's fingers twitched near his holster. We could burn this place down. Every inch of it. You could, Thomas agreed, voice as dry as bone. But it'd take some doing. And you'd lose at least 2 men before it caught. Cade's eyes narrowed. I figure you ain't that eager to die today, Thomas added, stepping forward just slightly. But if you are, you best draw now, before I start counting to 3. The matchstick fell from the chewing outlaw's mouth. Another rider shifted in his saddle. The quiet snapped tight. Cade stared a long time. The storm above broke for a second, thunder rumbling low like a warning from the hills. Then, just as sudden, he pulled on the reins and turned his horse around. Let's go, he barked. The gang hesitated only a beat before following. They rode back toward the ridge, without another word. Dust trailed them like smoke. Thomas waited until their silhouettes were swallowed by distance. Then he walked back to the barn. He opened the hidden wall. Clara stood before he even reached the bottom step. Are they gone? For now. Her hands were shaking, but not as bad as before. He pulled a revolver from his belt, held it out to her. She hesitated. Her fingers brushed the grip like it was something sacred, or cursed. You'll need steady hands and no mercy, Thomas said. Can you do that? Clara looked down at the weapon, then back up at him. Her lips were tight, her eyes clearer than he'd seen them yet. I can, she said. He nodded, stepping aside to let her back into the light. As she climbed past him, the storm finally broke behind them, rain falling slow and sparse at first, then harder, like the sky was washing the blood from something it couldn't see. Midnight hung heavy over the Boone Ranch, the world wrapped in black silence, but for the distant growl of thunder. A dry lightning storm crawled across the horizon, jagged white veins tearing through the sky without rain. The wind had gone still. Not dead, just waiting. Thomas knelt near the barn, his hands dusted in soil and ash, tying off a trip wire between 2 barrels. The rifle lay nearby, ready. His breath was slow, measured. His eyes, narrowed beneath the brim of his hat, never stopped moving. Old instincts whispered to him now, footsteps in tall grass, shadows that breathed wrong, the chill that clung to a man's spine right before bullets flew. Inside the house, Clara loaded shells into the small revolver he'd given her. Her hands moved with a quiet focus, steadier than they had any right to be. Blood stained the sleeve of her dress. She'd cut herself earlier, setting nails in the porch floorboard, sharp enough to pierce a boot. She hadn't even winced. They didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. The silence snapped just after 1, hooves, slow and measured, crunching dry earth. Then more. The faint jingle of spurs. A low whistle. Shadows moved along the edge of the fence, dark shapes against darker night. The Keller brothers were back. This time they weren't asking. Thomas slipped into the shadows behind the trough, rifle cocked and eyes on the west side of the barn. 2 riders dismounted near the gate, creeping low with pistols drawn. One stepped directly over the wire. The explosion was quick and bright. A flash of flame, a blast of noise, barrels knocked loose. One man screaming as shrapnel tore through his leg. The horses bolted, whinnying into the night. Thomas fired once. Then again. A figure dropped. From the house, a shot rang out, sharp, panicked. Clara. Another outlaw staggered from the porch steps, gripping his thigh, blood soaking his jeans. Clara stood in the doorway, arms locked, teeth clenched. She fired again. Missed. Fired again. The man dropped. Thunder cracked across the heavens, echoing the gunfire. Lightning lit the barnyard in flashes, bodies, dust, blood sprayed on fences, shadows fleeing behind woodpiles. The storm in the sky never broke. No rain came. Just fire, thunder, and vengeance. Thomas ran for the barn. A shadow moved inside. Cade. He knew it. He stepped into the darkness, the wooden walls groaning as wind pushed through slats. His boots crunched straw and grit. He didn't raise the rifle. He knew Cade wanted something personal, and he wasn't wrong. Cade Keller stepped from behind the stalls, whip scar slashed white across his face, pistol raised. A cruel grin stretched across his lips. "You're a damn fool, Boone," he said. "Should have stayed out of it." Thomas didn't answer, just stepped forward. Cade fired. The shot went wide. Thomas had ducked, rolled, shoulder first into Cade's gut. They crashed to the ground, fists flying, elbows cracking ribs. The pistol skidded across the dirt. Cade slammed a knee into Thomas's side, but Thomas struck back with a hammering blow to the jaw. They rolled near the firelight spilling in from the broken barn wall, shadows dancing across them like ghosts. Cade reached for a pitchfork. Thomas kicked it away. Then Cade drew a knife, short, wicked, the kind meant for bleeding, not cutting. He swung. Thomas caught the blade with his forearm, steel biting deep. He grunted, twisted Cade's wrist. The knife dropped. Cade shoved him back, staggered to the side, then drew a second revolver from his belt. Thomas rose to his feet, breath ragged, blood dripping to the floorboards. Cade leveled the gun, but before he could fire, another shot echoed through the barn. Cade's chest jerked. He turned, confused more than hurt, and saw Clara standing in the doorway, smoke trailing from the barrel of her revolver. Her dress was torn, face streaked with dirt and blood, eyes wide but locked on him without flinching. Cade raised his gun. She fired again. This time, his body slammed back into the stall beam. He collapsed, the silver spurs on his boots twitching once, then falling still. For a long moment, no one moved. The barn smelled of sweat and fire and blood. Outside, the wind picked up again, howling low like it was morning. Clara dropped the gun. Her legs trembled. She looked at Thomas, who nodded once through the pain, hand pressed to his bleeding arm. "It's done," he said. They buried the bodies by sunrise, beneath the bluff east of the property, where the prairie grasses swayed like waves. The ground was hard, but neither of them spoke of stopping. When they reached Cade's corpse, Clara knelt beside his boot, unbuckled the silver spur, and slipped it into her pocket. Later, she dug a small hole near the edge of the garden and laid the spur into it. She said nothing aloud, just stared into the dirt like it held the last memory of someone who mattered. Her brother, lost in the fire, sacrificed so she could live. When she was done, she wiped her hands and turned to Thomas. "I don't know where I go now." He looked out across the land, broken fences, blood in the dust, but the barn still standing, the house still there. "Stay as long as you need," he said. "Some things grow again, given time." She nodded, and they sat on the porch together as the sun finally rose, the plains painted in gold and pink, the ranch scarred but standing, a man and a girl with nothing left behind them, and maybe something waiting ahead, not blood but choice. And in the quiet, where fire once raged, something like peace began.